Hello, listener. I want to talk a little bit about respecting your enemy. And I want to do this in the context of Lawrence of Arabia. Now, most people know Lawrence of Arabia, who he was. There's this famous Peter O'Toole movie about him. His memoirs are, of course, published and widely read. But we don't often hear about his opposite, about who it was that was commanding the Turkish forces that he was facing. And so this was General Omar Fahreddin Turkan, or as he was known at the time, Fahreddin Pasha. He has two different names because of the change in naming conventions in the Ottoman Empire after the First World War. Now, he commanded the garrison of Medina and the railway line to the sea, to Hejaz, which was the main objective of Lawrence of Arabia was, of course, sabotage. And he actually held the garrison and the railway line from 1916 until 1919. Yes, until after the surrender of the Ottomans, because he had a vision of Muhammad commanding him to hold the city. So he did. He held out the railway line and the defense of Medina until 1919. And he only surrendered when his soldiers were close to starvation and close to being defeated. And his last action was sending all of the holy relics of Medina by rail to the sea so they could be shipped to Istanbul, where they were kept for until fairly recently, where a few of them were shipped back to Medina. When he was urged to surrender, this was his reply. Fakr ud-Din, General, defender of the most sacred city of Medina, servant of the Prophet. In the name of Allah, the Omnipotent. To him who broke the power of Islam, caused bloodshed among Muslims, jeopardized the caliphate of the Commander of the Faithful, and exposed it to the domination of the British. On Thursday night, the 14th of Dhul Hijjah, I was walking, tired and worn out, thinking of the protection and defense of Medina, when I found myself among unknown men working in a small square. Then I saw standing before me a man with a sublime countenance. He was the Prophet. May Allah's blessing be upon him. His left arm rested on his hip under his robe, and he said to me in a protective manner, "Follow me." I followed him 2 or 3 paces and woke up. I immediately proceeded to the sacred mosque and prostrated myself in prayer and thanks, near his tomb. I am now under the protection of the Prophet, my supreme commander. I am busying myself with strengthening defenses, building roads and squares in Medina. Trouble me not with these useless offers. So he rejected the offer to surrender. He even refused to surrender after direct order from the Ottoman Minister of War. He was even dismissed as general by the Sultan, but he kept the Ottoman flag flying in Medina for 72 days until he was absolutely forced to surrender by a rebellion of his own men who were starving. Now, if you look at it from a traditionalist perspective, Lawrence of Arabia is an interloper, a modernist. I mean, he was probably even a homosexual. And he's not really worth remembering as much as his actual opponent was. This man, Fahreddin Pasha, was defending his faith, his traditions, his country. It's very obvious in his reply where he says, "To him who broke the power of Islam, caused bloodshed among Muslims, and jeopardized the caliphate of the Commander of the Faithful, then exposed it to the domination of the British." He views the Arab revolt as basically betrayal of Islam, of betrayal of his traditions and his faith. And as traditionalist, there's much more to admire in this man than in Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia is some bourgeois gallivanting adventurer going around destroying a religious theocracy. Well, he does do it for his own fatherland, of course. He does do it for Britain, but Britain is being a colonizer, an oppressor, and is, of course, going to destroy a much more traditionalist society and impose liberal values on it and split it up for its own geopolitical interests. like it did with Syria. And of course, then you get the Balfour Declaration, the formation of Israel, all this stuff, right? It breaks up what was once a religious theocratic empire. So I think there's much more to be admired about Fahreddin Pasha than Lawrence of Arabia. And in that sense, the context of respecting your enemies, right? We have to acknowledge that there are in Islam respectable figures, and that they have their own tradition to defend, and they have their own people to defend. That does not make them any less of an enemy of our own civilization. I mean, Western civilization is not Muslim. Its traditions, its faith is alien to us. But it does not mean you have to treat them as sort of wild beasts, which is how many liberals who are opposed to Islam regard them, as some sort of backwards, uncivilized barbarians, basically. And I think people who are genuinely faithful, fighting for their civilization, that's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they might express it in rather brutal ways, like ISIS does, as that is one of the things that is wrong with Islam, in my opinion, is that it expresses perennial values in far too brutal ways, because it is held by a less intelligent and less refined people, so they express these values in a less refined way. But you can still respect that they do try and hold to these perennial values. I can respect Islam for fighting against liberalism and modernity. It doesn't mean I have to like them being in my own country, of course. And I can respect the spirit of a suicide bomber who sacrifices everything for his beliefs. And therefore I also respect Fahreddin Pasha for his stubborn defense of Medina, which is where Muhammad is buried, and is one of the two holiest cities in Islam, against British liberal degeneracy. So yeah, they should make a movie about him rather than about Lawrence of Arabia.